If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello all. Today, Sonia is interviewing John about the apparent contradiction in the Bible regarding the year of Jesus' birth. Matthew tells us Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great, who, we are told, died in 4 BC, while Luke tells us Jesus was born during a census conducted when Quirinius was the governor of Syria, and we are told that this man did not govern until AD 6. Can these assertions be reconciled? It will take several episodes to cover this topic, so if any episode ends with the contradiction still being unresolved, never fear. Tune in to a subsequent episode to find out this challenge addressed in full. If you miss any episodes, you can find them in our podcast. See truthinmydays.com for the location. We hope you enjoy the series.
If that's the case, why would anyone assume it was the insignificant one if there are those two perfectly good ones in 1 BC?
Well, once they have misread Josephus to calculate that Herod died in 3 BC, they're looking for the closest eclipse, and the closest they find is 4 BC. I don't, and some of them may not. These are not astronomers. These are Bible scholars. I don't know if they bothered even to look at the details of the eclipse. They might just have heard there's one in 4 BC and not examine the facts to see whether it even would have been noticed by the people or not. But the fact as we've seen them is no, they would not have been noticed.
Although I guess someone must have noticed the 4 BC one for it to have been recorded like that.
It wasn't recorded. This was all based on astronomical calculations we do now, based on the motion of the stars, planets, and moon as we understand it.
Oh.
Concluding this part of what we've talked about, when did Herod die? It was not 4 BC, it was 1 BC. Which means that when Jesus was born, it would have been perhaps late, it would have been 2 BC. Possibly very early 1 BC, but most likely in 2 BC. Now, that doesn't quite solve the problem because that's a lot closer than 4 BC. But supposedly, if Quirinius didn't start governing until AD 6, you still don't get the proper overlap. So what do you think we should do next?
Well, I guess we have to look at the data for Quirinius now.
Exactly. Remember our principle, never trust, always verify. Asking the questions, how do you know? What is your evidence? What are you leaving out? You can't just, as we did with Herod, we can't just accept the claim that Herod died in 4 BC. We need to go over the evidence. We found Herod died in 1 BC, which means Jesus would have been born in 2 BC, perhaps. And that fits the biblical data much better as well, because Jesus began his ministry, according to the data in Luke 3:1, about the year 30, AD 30, and we're told he was about 30 years of age. So he would have been, say, 31 at that time, maybe 31 and a half, which fits well with Luke's designation. If he'd been born in 4 BC, he would have been 34, pushing 35 by that time, which is not exactly about 30. So this... We've got this part straight now. Herod died in 1 BC, but we still have this problem with Quirinius, so we have to do the same thing with Quirinius that we did with Herod. Ask the question, how do you know Quirinius became governor of Syria in the year AD 6? What is your evidence for that? That's the question that needs to be asked that nobody seems to ask. The statements are made with such confidence that no one thinks to ask. No one seems to think to ask. Well, we're going to ask. And when we do, it looks like there's a lot of data for it. Reading from, I believe it's a book by John Loftus. He's quoting Paul Tobin. we read that Quirinius's career is relatively well documented in our primary sources. Tacitus's Annals of Imperial Rome, 322 to 23 and 348. Suetonius's Tiberius, section 49. Strabo's Geography, section 12.6.5. And Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, section 17.3.5 and 18.1.1, all mention aspects of his career. From these accounts, we know that he was born somewhere before 50 BCE and that he died in 22 CE. We know that he was a consul of Rome by 12 BCE. He was in Asia Minor between 12 and 6 BCE, where he fought the war against the Homonadenses. He was the governor of Pamphylia, Galatia between 6 and 1 BCE, and he was serving as the advisor for Gaius Caesar for several years before 4 CE. Josephus mentioned Quirinius several times when he became governor of Syria in 6 CE. So we read of Quirinius' career spanning 20 years from 12 BCE to 6 CE, yet not once was he mentioned as taking over the governorship of Syria at any time during the reign of Herod. The conclusion is inescapable. Quirinius could not have been governor of Syria twice. So does that sound pretty conclusive?
Okay, I'm not... I after hearing all those little facts, I still don't really get how that means he couldn't have been governor of Syria twice.
That's a good question. But here's the thing. Our author lists all these sources: Tacitus, Annals, Suetonius, Tiberius, Strabo's Geography, Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. And you think with all these sources, they can't be wrong, can they?
Well, the author said they all mention aspects of his career. If we're just looking for when he was the governor of Syria, then are they all mentioning that particular aspect?
And that's exactly the way to ask questions. That's exactly the thing to look at. When you do that, you will find that this is all bluff, folks. It's bluff. Okay? If you look up the reference in Tacitus, you will find nothing about Quirinius in Syria. No dates, hardly anything at all about Quirinius' political career. He's mentioned as a person, but we don't get details from Tacitus. If we look in Suetonius, we find absolutely nothing at all. If we look in the third out of the four sources, Strabo has a very brief mention of Quirinius in the war against the Homonadenses and nothing else. So these claims about when Quirinius governed Syria is not documented in multiple different sources.
Oh, sneaky.
It's only in Josephus. But again, how many biblical scholars accept the claims and tell us that there's an intractable problem here? We have to wait to find some new historical evidence, but the way it is, it looks really bad because they don't bother to check. Don't trust liberal scholars. Do not. Verify. Check the sources.
Okay, so the date of him becoming governor of Syria in 60 is just from Antiquities then?
It's only from Josephus. And that puts a very different spin on it, doesn't it? Because liberal scholars want you to see it this way. Luke commits an error because he has Jesus' birth taking place while Quirinius was governing Syria, although he didn't govern Syria until AD 6. How is it actually now?
Luke and Josephus disagree on when Quirinius governed Syria.
Yeah, that's the most you can say. Luke and Josephus disagree on when Quirinius governed Syria. See, liberal scholars want to teach, without mentioning it, the inspiration and inerrancy of Josephus. Now, only when it suits their purposes to undermine the Bible. But Josephus is by no means inerrant. The reality here is, if indeed Josephus puts Quirinius at AD 6, and we haven't established that yet, but even if he did, what we have here is Luke disagreeing with Josephus. Why we should assume that Josephus is correct and therefore Luke is wrong is not something that these scholars tell us. It's not Luke versus the facts, it's Luke versus Josephus. And the simple question, who is the more reliable historian? Well, liberal scholars have operated for a long time trying to convince us that Luke is not reliable. And through the years, many accusations were brought against things that Luke recorded in his books. on the basis that these were not known to history, they were not recorded, they were not even possible. One prominent example is Luke's statement in Acts 18:12 that Galileo was proconsul of Achaya. The skeptics told us that Galileo never governed Achaya since he is not mentioned in any Roman list, and the title proconsul of Achaya, by the way, is impossible. In Luke 3:1, Luke tells us that at this time Lissanius was Tetrarch of Abilene. And this is an error, the liberals told us, because Lissanius died in the year 36 BC. Luke talks about the polytarchs in Acts chapter 17, verse 6. And liberal skeptics told us here's another error from Luke. Such a title was never used for city authorities. And the list goes on. Acts 19:35, Luke refers to the temple guardians, the neokaros in Ephesus. We were told this title is impossible. Luke mentions a proconsul in Cyprus in Acts 13:7 and 8 and 12. Liberal skeptics told us this title is impossible. It was not known from Roman writings. The idea that we knew everything that the Romans used from the writings we had, of course, never really made sense. But these were the
we do have a lot of writings from the Romans, though, don't we?
We do, but by no means all of it or half of it. We'll see that as we move on. Acts 28:7, Luke mentions the leader in Malta is called the first man of the island, and here too we were told that this is impossible. But in fact, subsequent archaeological discoveries vindicated Luke in every single one of these cases, every single one.
Maybe that's something like what Daniel Wallace or whoever it was hoping would be discovered to fix this supposedly intractable problem.
Yes, the problem is there an intractable problem? The difference is that Wallace thinks that we have hard historical evidence contradicting what Luke says. In this case, the arguments were always arguments from silence. They weren't setting evidence against what Luke said. They never had a ancient statement saying Galileo never was proconsul of Achaya. It was always an argument from silence. That's the difference. So, speaking of Galileo, they told us that Galileo never governed Achaya since he was not listed in any of the Roman lists. Further, confidently maintained that the title proconsul of Achaya was impossible. So Luke is clearly not a reliable historian, they crowed, until an inscription was discovered at Delphi in 1908 that dated to the year AD 51 and identified Galileo by name and called him proconsul. Remember, that's the title we were told was impossible, and yet that was the title found on that inscription that dated to the year AD 51. Galileo's tenure was short-lived, beginning in AD 51, ending in AD 52, which may explain why it was not mentioned on the lists. Lissanius, Tetrarch of Abilene, we were told that this has to be a mistake since Lissanius died in 36 BC. And they kept insisting on that until an inscription dated between AD 14 and 29 was found at Abilene that mentioned Lissanius the Tetrarch.
So it was a different Lissanius?
Must have been a second Lissanius, which is not at all unusual to think that could have happened. But this inscription tells us that, yes, at the very time Luke says Lissanius was Tetrarch of Abilene or Abilene, we now have hard contemporary inscriptional evidence telling us, yeah, Luke is right. And remember, the liberals told us that's not possible. Luke is not trustworthy. Wow, Luke is right. The polytarchs in Thessalonica were told that they never used this title, and they kept saying that until an inscription that dated between the years AD 69 and 79 was found in 1835 in Thessalonica, in that very city, that listed the polytarchs of that city using the name that liberals told us was impossible. They didn't use that title.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part, same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com.